Picture this. It's Monday morning in Toronto. The stadium lights are still buzzing. And a 21-year-old from the Philippines is walking off center court, having just been bageled in the second set by one of the smartest competitors the sport has ever produced. And somehow, that walk off the court might be the single most important moment of her entire season. Because in 3 days, she's going to be standing on a different hard court in Mason, Ohio, staring down a field that includes basically every big name in women's tennis. And the question nobody can quite answer yet is whether her legs, her mind, and that famous forehand will have anything left to give. We're talking about Alex Eala, and if her name hasn't fully registered with you yet, it's about to. Because what she's done over the last month is the kind of run that gets replayed in highlight reels for years. Let's rewind a little, because to understand why Cincinnati matters so much, you have to understand the road that got her here. Alex arrived in Washington a few weeks back as a talented but still somewhat unproven 20-something on tour. The kind of player scouts whisper about, but casual fans haven't quite locked onto yet. She left Washington a champion, taking down Jessica Pegula in the final to claim her first-ever WTA title. And if you know anything about tennis, you know that beating a player of Pegula's caliber in a final isn't a fluke, it's a statement. From there, the schedule didn't slow down for a second. She landed in Toronto for the Canadian Open, one of the toughest WTA 1000 events on the calendar. And instead of coasting on the emotional high of Washington, she kept grinding. She battled past Alicia Parks. She then survived a brutal, extended fight against Katie McNally that stretched into 3 sets and reportedly left her nursing a tweaked ankle along the way. That's the kind of detail that gets buried in a highlight package, but matters enormously when you're trying to figure out how much gas is left in the tank. By the time she walked out to face Belinda Bencic in the round of 16, Alex had played some of the most physically demanding tennis of her young career in back-to-back weeks. And it showed. Bencic, an Olympic gold medalist and one of the most tactically gifted players on tour, came out and played close to a perfect match. The first set was tight, genuinely competitive. Alex even broke serve at one point and had her chances, but Bencic closed it out 6-4. And then the second set happened, and it wasn't pretty. 6-love. A bagel on the biggest stage, in front of a crowd that had shown up specifically to cheer her on. Now here's where I want you to pause and really think about what a scoreline like that means. Because the easy, lazy reaction is to see 6-love and assume collapse, assume crisis, assume the wheels came off completely. But if you actually watch the tape, what you see isn't panic. It's fatigue, plain and simple. The kind of fatigue that comes from playing your best tennis for 2 straight weeks against increasingly difficult opponents while your body quietly racks up a bill that eventually comes due. Her first serve percentage dropped. Her movement into the corners, usually one of the best things about her game, got a half-step slower. Bencic, veteran that she is, smelled blood and took the ball earlier and earlier until the match was basically over before Alex could recalibrate. And look, losing 7 straight, then hitting a wall isn't some hidden scandal. It's just what happens to human bodies under that kind of load, and honestly, ending the match in just over an hour instead of grinding out another marathon, 3-setter might turn out to be the best thing that could have happened for what comes next. Because here's the thing about the tennis calendar in August. There's no time to sit and sulk. 3 days after that Toronto defeat, Alex is set to walk onto the courts at the Lindner Family Tennis Center for the Cincinnati Open, a WTA 1000 event that's become one of the last real proving grounds before the U.S. Open. And when reporters asked her after the Bencic match how she planned to bounce back in such a short window, her answer told you everything about who this young woman actually is. She wasn't talking tactics or drills or extra hours in the gym. She talked about getting a haircut. She mentioned her nails needed doing. She said she wanted to see some friends, clear her head, just be a normal 21-year-old for a couple of days instead of a professional athlete carrying the hopes of an entire tennis-mad nation on her shoulders. Now, If you're rolling your eyes at that, thinking that sounds a little too casual for someone about to face a murderer's row of opponents, I'd push back on that instantly, because any sports psychologist worth their salt will tell you that this exact kind of mental detachment is precisely what elite performers need after a stretch like the one she just survived. When you live inside hotel rooms, practice courts, ice baths, and press conferences for weeks on end, your nervous system doesn't get a chance to actually reset. Your cortisol stays elevated. Your muscles never fully let go of the tension. And recovery becomes incomplete, even if you're sleeping enough hours. By stepping outside that bubble for even a day or two, doing something as mundane as getting her hair done or laughing with friends over a meal, Alex is doing exactly what her training at the Rafa Nadal Academy would have instilled in her. Because that academy is famous for teaching players not just how to fight on court, but how to completely switch off once the fighting is done. And that skill, knowing when to flip the intensity on and when to let it go, is often the difference between a promising young talent and a genuine contender who can sustain a long career at the top. So don't be surprised if she looks remarkably fresh when she steps onto the court in Ohio. Because sometimes the best recovery plan isn't more physio. It's simply remembering you're allowed to be a person for 48 hours. Now let's talk about what she's actually walking into. Because the Cincinnati draw this year is absolutely stacked, maybe one of the deepest fields you'll see anywhere outside a Grand Slam. Aryna Sabalenka is the top seed, arguably still the most powerful ball striker in the sport, and someone who's clearly hungry to reassert her dominance after a season with a few bumps along the way. Elena Rybakina is lurking, and if you've ever watched her serve on a fast, hard court, you know exactly how dangerous that combination can be. Iga Swiatek returns as the defending champion, looking to prove that her game translates just as well on hard courts in Ohio as it does on the clay she's traditionally dominated. Coco Gauff will have a hometown level of crowd support given her profile in the States. And then you've got Naomi Osaka, a four-time Grand Slam champion who's been finding her rhythm again this season and is more than capable of making a deep run if the draw opens up for her. That's the gauntlet. That's who stands between Alex and a big result in Mason. And honestly, the courts themselves play right into a lot of what makes her dangerous. Because Cincinnati has a reputation for being fast, low-bouncing, and unforgiving to anyone who hesitates, which rewards exactly the kind of first strike, aggressive baseline tennis that Alex has built her game around over the past year. Her serve has genuinely leveled up recently, no longer just a way to start the point safely, but an actual weapon that can set up easy forehands. And on a surface like this, a reliable first serve becomes almost a prerequisite for survival against players who can end points in 3 or 4 shots if you let them dictate. The other piece of this puzzle that you simply cannot ignore is the crowd, because the Filipino tennis fan base has become one of the genuine phenomena of the 2026 season. Wherever Alex plays, you see flags, you hear chants, you feel an atmosphere that transforms an ordinary tour stop into something closer to a home game. And even Bencic acknowledged after their match in Toronto just how loud and passionate that support was. For a player who might be running on fumes physically, that kind of crowd energy can act almost like an extra gear, a jolt that keeps legs moving when the scoreboard and the body are both screaming for a break. When you're down break point in a third set, and you hear an entire section of the stadium roaring your name, that's not something that shows up in any statistic, but any athlete who's experienced it will tell you it's real. And in Cincinnati, that support is going to follow her onto every court she plays. So where does that leave us heading into the tournament? I think the honest answer is that nobody, not the pundits, not the coaches, probably not even Alex herself right now, knows exactly how her body is going to respond after such a short turnaround. 2 or 3 days is not a lot of time to fully flush out the kind of accumulated fatigue that builds up after a title run followed immediately by a grueling week of 3-set battles. There's a very real chance she comes out sluggish in the early rounds, gets picked apart by a lower-ranked player who's fresher and hungrier, and the whole thing ends quietly before the big names even get involved. That's a completely legitimate outcome, and nobody should be shocked if it happens. But there's also a very real chance that the opposite occurs, that the release of pressure from finally losing after 7 straight wins actually frees her up mentally, that the couple of days spent away from the sport genuinely did reset her system the way she clearly believes it did, and that she walks into Mason with nothing to lose, and a chip on her shoulder the size of the entire Cincinnati skyline. Champions are usually defined less by the matches they win comfortably and more by how they respond in the window right after adversity hits. And this is about as clean a test of that as you're going to find. A proven closer against a brutal schedule with basically no time to hide. What makes this storyline so compelling isn't just the tennis itself, it's the broader context sitting underneath it. This entire hard-court swing, running from her breakthrough at Wimbledon, through her maiden title in Washington, and now into Toronto and Cincinnati, has been building toward one destination, the U.S. Open, the last Grand Slam of the year, and the biggest stage tennis has to offer in North America. Whatever happens in Cincinnati is going to shape how she walks into Flushing Meadows, both in terms of confidence and in terms of how seriously the rest of the locker room takes her. A strong showing, even a couple of impressive wins over ranked opponents, keeps her name in every conversation about dark horses for New York. A quick exit doesn't erase what she's already accomplished this summer, but it does hand a little bit of ammunition to anyone still wondering whether her run was more flash than substance, and you can be sure some of the sport's bigger names would love nothing more than to see her stumble before the Open even starts. That's the added weight she's carrying into every single point in Mason, on top of everything else. And there's something bigger happening here too, something that goes beyond wins and losses on a stat sheet. Alex is doing this while representing a country that has never had a player break through to this level of the sport before, and every match she plays carries that added significance, the pressure of being the first, of knowing there's no blueprint to follow because nobody from her nation has walked this exact path. That's an enormous weight to carry at 21, and yet what keeps standing out about her, tournament after tournament, is how calm she seems under it. How she can lose a brutal straight sets match in front of a huge crowd and still walk off with her head held high. Still find room to smile. Still talk openly about getting a haircut instead of hiding behind excuses about her ankle or her legs or the schedule. That kind of composure is rare, and it's exactly the trait that tends to separate players who have one great month from players who go on to have great careers. So as the draw gets released and the first matches begin in Cincinnati, keep an eye on which side of the bracket Alex lands on, because you can bet the seeded players are going to be quietly hoping to avoid her in the early rounds, knowing full well that a rested, motivated version of her on a fast hard court with a stadium full of supporters behind her is not an opponent anyone wants to face without a serious game plan. Whether her legs have truly recovered in time, whether that short break really was enough to reset the tank, we're about to find out in real time, match by match, point by point, in front of everyone. And that, honestly, is what makes this such a great story to follow. Not some polished, predictable narrative, but a genuine, open question with real stakes attached to it. Will the fatigue that showed up so clearly against Bencic resurface the moment she steps back onto a competitive court? Or will a couple of days away from the grind be exactly what it takes to flip the switch back on? I don't think anyone can say for certain right now, and honestly, that uncertainty is part of what makes this era of women's tennis so much fun to watch. So here's what I want to know from you watching this. Drop your predictions down in the comments. Tell me how deep you think Alex goes in Cincinnati. Tell me whether you think the short recovery window helps her or hurts her. And tell me who you think poses the biggest threat to her run. Whether that's Sabalenka's raw power, Rybakina's serve, Swiatek's all-court game, or somebody flying a little more under the radar that people aren't talking about enough yet. If you've enjoyed this breakdown, going deep on the story behind the storylines instead of just reading off a scoreline, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps push this kind of coverage out to more tennis fans who might be missing it. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the day-by-day coverage we're planning to run all the way through Cincinnati and into the U.S. Open. Because this stretch of the season is shaping up to be one of the most compelling storylines women's tennis has had in years, and Alex is right in the middle of it. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.